Welcome to the Partardez channel. Today, we explain Prophets Kings 2, chapter 14, in a clear and simple way, step by step. We've got a lot of incredible history to cover, so let's jump straight into the text.
You know, this chapter is an absolutely fascinating historical roller coaster. We're going to look verse by verse at the plain text to really understand the massive geopolitical shifts taking place between the southern kingdom of Judah and the northern kingdom of Israel. We'll unpack the step-by-step history of how a great military victory can lead to devastating arrogance, and ultimately a really tragic downfall. We're going to look deeply at the reigns of the kings in both of these ancient nations, try to understand their psychological motivations, and see exactly how their paths violently collide.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with the context and Amaziah's rise to power. Then we'll cover the massive war with Edom and Israel, followed by the dramatic fall of King Amaziah. After that, we'll shift up north to look at Jeroboam II in Israel. We'll wrap things up with some key ideas and practical life lessons, and finally, a quick chapter recap in conclusion. Okay, let's start with section 1, context and Amaziah's rise. So we're starting our journey right down in the southern kingdom of Judah. The context here is absolutely crucial because we're picking up the story right after a period of intense political instability, literally right after the assassination of the previous king, Joash. Verses 1 through 3 establish exactly who is stepping onto the throne to clean up this mess. In the second year of King Joash of Israel, a young man named Amaziah takes power in Judah. He's just 25 years old when he begins his reign. Think about that. He is plenty old enough to fully understand the brutal, treacherous politics that led to his father's violent death. He's going to rule in Jerusalem for 29 years, and we're told his mother's name is Joash from Jerusalem. Now, the text evaluates him right out of the gate by saying Amaziah did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, but it immediately throws in a caveat. He was not as perfect as his ancestor, King David. See, David was the ultimate gold standard for the kings of Judah. He represented deep, wholehearted devotion to God. Amaziah instead followed the example of his father, Joash. This essentially tells us he was fundamentally good, but flawed. His obedience was, well, kind of surface level. Moving into verses 4 through 6, we see exactly what those flaws and strengths looked like in practice. First up, the text notes that the high places, also known in Hebrew as Bamot, were not removed. Even though the magnificent temple existed right there in Jerusalem, the people continued to lazily, or maybe rebelliously, offer sacrifices and burn incense on local hillsides. The fact that Amaziah allowed this to continue shows a significant lack of absolute spiritual authority. But on the flip side, Amaziah also demonstrates strong, principled justice. Once his kingdom was firmly in his grasp, he executed the officials who had murdered his father. That's expected, right? Yet, he strictly adhered to the plain meaning of the law of Moses here. He deliberately spared the children of the assassins. This was direct obedience to the specific command from Deuteronomy, which stated that fathers shall not be put to death for their children, nor children for their fathers. Each is to die for his own sins. So he's fair, and he's playing by the book. Which brings us to Section 2, War with Edom and Israel. Having secured his throne and established domestic justice, the narrative suddenly transitions in verse 7 to a major military conflict. Amaziah looks outward and launches a massive campaign against Edom. He marches out and defeats 10,000 Edomites in the Valley of Salt, a really rugged region down near the Dead Sea. Now, in ancient warfare, wiping out 10,000 men, that is a staggering, monumental achievement. It's a real game changer. But he doesn't stop there. He also captures Sela in battle, renaming it Joktheel. Sela literally translates to rock, and this was a heavily fortified, elevated plateau, widely believed to be an early version of the almost impenetrable city of Petra. Defeating 10,000 men and taking an impossible rock fortress wasn't just a minor border skirmish. This was a historic, sweeping military victory. Amaziah has completely crushed a formidable enemy and taken their ultimate stronghold. Understanding the sheer scale of this triumph is absolutely key because it explains exactly why Amaziah's ego grew so massive right after this. And that brings us to verse 8. High on his victory over Edom, Amaziah makes a catastrophic miscalculation. He sends messengers up north to Jehoash, the king of Israel, with a direct military challenge. He says, "Come meet me face to face." Think about the incredible geopolitical tension here for a second. Contrast these two kings. Amaziah is a freshly victorious king, completely drunk on his own success, arrogant and highly overconfident. King Jehoash of Israel, on the other hand, is an established military power who really just wants to stay home in peace. Jehoash basically views Amaziah as an annoying, overconfident upstart who doesn't know his place.
So in verses 9 and 10, King Jehoash responds to Amaziah's challenge, but he doesn't immediately send armies. Instead, he sends a vivid, stinging parable. He says, "A thistle in Lebanon sent a message to a cedar in Lebanon, 'Give your daughter to my son in marriage.' Then a wild beast in Lebanon came along and trampled the thistle underfoot." Wow, it is an absolutely incredible insult. Jehoash is comparing himself to the mighty, deeply rooted cedar tree of Lebanon, renowned for its massive size and strength. Amaziah, meanwhile, is compared to a tiny, prickly, insignificant little thistle. Jehoash tells him plainly, "Look, you have indeed defeated Edom, and now your heart has lifted you up. You're arrogant. Glory in your victory, but stay at home. Why ask for trouble and cause your own downfall and take Judah down with you?" It's a brilliant warning.
But let's look at section 3, the fall of King Amaziah. Verse 11 gives us the tragic pivot of this story. Amaziah would not listen. Because of his intense pride, he completely ignores the stern, wise warning, and the disastrous consequences unfold incredibly fast. Let's walk through verses 11 to 14 step by step. King Jehoash of Israel attacks, and the two armies face off at Beth-Shemesh, which belongs to Judah. Step 1. Judah is utterly routed by Israel. Every man flees to his home in sheer panic. Step 2. The mighty King Jehoash captures the arrogant King Amaziah right there on the battlefield. Step 3 is a profound, devastating humiliation. Jehoash brings his royal prisoner back to Amaziah's own capital, Jerusalem. Jehoash breaks down the defensive wall of Jerusalem from the Ephraim gate to the corner gate. This is a massive breach of 400 cubits. To put that in perspective, that's about 600 feet of solid stone wall just destroyed. This wasn't just physical damage, it was the ultimate strategic humiliation, rendering the capital completely defenseless. And finally, step 4. Jehoash loots the city. He takes all the gold, the silver, and the sacred articles from the temple of the Lord. This was an act of supreme disrespect to God, triggered entirely by Amaziah's foolishness. Jehoash empties the royal treasuries, takes hostages, and casually goes back home to Samaria. Verses 15 through 20 explain the chronological aftermath of this disaster. Ironically, the victorious King Joash dies peacefully not long after this and is buried in Samaria with the kings of Israel. Meanwhile, the humiliated King Amaziah lives on for 15 more years after Joash's death. But his credibility? It's entirely ruined. A conspiracy forms against him right in his own capital of Jerusalem. Amaziah discovers the plot and runs for his life to the fortified city of Lachish. Now, Lachish was the second most important fortified city in all of Judah, heavily guarded and historically significant. Fleeing there shows Amaziah was absolutely desperate, yet he still couldn't escape the consequences of his lost credibility. The conspirators are relentless. They send men after him to Lachish and assassinate him right there. His body is brought back on horseback and buried with his fathers in Jerusalem. It's a tragic, incredibly undignified end to a reign that started with such promise. Before we completely leave Judah, verses 21 and 22 tie up the succession. All the people of Judah take Amaziah's son, Azariah, who is also known as Uzziah, who is just 16 years old, and they make him king in place of his father. Despite his very young age, the text notes an immediate, practical action. He rebuilt the town of Elath and restored it to Judah. This is highly significant. Elath was a vital port city way down on the Red Sea. Rebuilding it showed the 16-year-old Azariah was immediately focused on restoring Judah's economy and trade routes after his father had effectively bankrupted the whole kingdom through a foolish, ego-driven war. All right, moving on to section 4, Jeroboam II in Israel. Now we need to shift our focus entirely up north. We are leaving Judah and looking at the northern kingdom of Israel during this exact same historical period. Verses 23 and 24 introduce Jeroboam, son of Jehoash. We have to carefully distinguish this specific king from the earlier Jeroboam, son of Nebat, who split the kingdom years prior. This is Jeroboam II. He begins his reign in Samaria and rules for a massive 41 years. That's a long time. However, his moral evaluation is swift and entirely negative. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. The text says he did not turn away from any of the sins of the first Jeroboam. So why is he considered so evil? Because he allowed the golden calves in the cities of Dan and Bethel to remain, intentionally keeping the entire nation of Israel in a state of continuous idolatry. But historically and militarily, his reign is incredibly significant. Verses 25 and 28 show us a massive territorial expansion. Jeroboam II restored the boundaries of Israel all the way from the entrance of Hamath in the far north down to the Sea of the Arabah, which is the Dead Sea. Geographically speaking, stretching from Hamath to the Dead Sea meant Jeroboam II restored Israel to almost the exact size it was during the glorious golden age of King Solomon.
This ushered in an era of unprecedented wealth and power for the north. He even recovered the territories of Damascus and Hamath for Israel. Interestingly, the text explicitly states this expansion was in accordance with the word of the Lord spoken through his servant Jonah, son of Amittai, the prophet from Gath-Hepher. And yes, for sure, this is the very same Jonah from the book of Jonah, acting here in a historical context as a prophet predicting national expansion. Now, this raises a huge question, right? Why did God grant such massive military success to a king who the text just told us was actively doing evil? Well, verses 26, 27, and 29 unpack this simple but profound theological insight directly from the plain meaning of the text. It wasn't because Jeroboam was righteous, it was because Israel was in absolute agony. The Lord had seen how bitterly everyone in Israel, whether slave or free, was suffering. There was literally no one left to help them. Because God had not yet decided to blot out the name of Israel from under heaven, he chose to show deep pity. He saved them and gave them relief by the hand of Jeroboam. This clearly shows that God's grace and compassion for the oppressed and marginalized in Israel was completely independent of the king's morality. Help and salvation arrived purely out of God's unmerited compassion for a suffering people, even when it had to be delivered through a deeply flawed ruler. Jeroboam then dies and is succeeded by his son Zechariah. Let's transition to Section 5, Key Ideas and Life Lessons. We've covered the history step by step. Now let's look at the active life lessons we can take away from the plain meaning of chapter 14. First up is the trap of arrogance. Amaziah's massive success against Edom completely blinded him to his own limitations. How often in our own careers or personal lives does a string of successes cause us to become arrogant and overreach, leading directly to our own ruin? Second, the absolute vital need to listen to warnings. Jehoash gave Amaziah incredibly sound advice. Stay home, enjoy your victory, do not overreach. But pride just deafened Amaziah to that wisdom. We have to cultivate the humility to listen to sound advice, especially when we feel invincible. And third, the beautiful concept of unmerited mercy. Up in Israel, God saw the bitter affliction of the people and sent them salvation through Jeroboam, proving that help can arrive out of sheer compassion, even when a generation has completely lost its moral way. Finally, Section 6, Chapter Recap and Conclusion. Before we review, I want to pose this provocative thought to you. Think about it. When you experience your next major success in life, your personal victory over Edom, how are you going to handle it? Will you stay grounded, or will you let pride blind you and lead you to challenge a cedar tree you have absolutely no business fighting? To quickly recap everything we've discussed, we saw King Amaziah's rise in Judah, marked by a surface-level obedience to the law of Moses. We watched as his monumental victory in the Valley of Salt bred a fatal pride. We witnessed his devastating, humiliating defeat at the hands of Israel, the looting of the temple in Jerusalem, and his ultimate assassination in Lachish as a desperate man on the run. Finally, we looked north to see Jeroboam II's 41-year reign, where he massively expanded Israel's borders back to Solomonic proportions, not because he was good, but because God showed deep mercy to a bitterly suffering people. Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.